The Bahamas Maritime Pilots Association presentation on pilotage in Freeport, and we actually call this an emergency conclave on the state of pilotage and safety in Freeport Harbor. You may ask why it's an emergency. You may also ask, is there an issue with the state of pilotage and the state of safety in Freeport? Well, the answer to those two questions are, number one, it is in fact an emergency. And number two, the state of pilotage is extremely poor, and we have to get Freeport as a harbor up to international standards. Here's what I mean by that. Number one, pilotage is not a business. And brought Mr. Nick Cutmore here from the International Maritime Pilots Association. He's also the representative at the International Maritime Organization for pilots throughout the world, 55 different countries that are members of the International Maritime Pilots Association. And he is here to talk to us about how pilotage systems are set up, the challenges with our pilotage system, and how we could move about improving that system to meet standards. Some of the things about our system that are major challenges. Number one, our pilots in the Bahamas, we have two systems of pilotage that are largely problematic. The first one is in Freeport. We have what we call company pilots. These pilots work directly for the companies involved in the maritime industry. Those pilots do not get to exercise what we call independent judgment. The reason why pilots need the ability to exercise independent judgment is because marine pilots are more importantly servicing the public's interest and the port's interest. They have to protect us from environmental hazards and dangers to property. And what that means is that the pilot should be able to make judgment aside from anyone's bottom line, aside from anyone's profit-making potential or anyone's liability. When you have a pilot that works for a company, that pilot is subject to company pressures, is subject to companies' bottom lines, and what that provides for us is a jurisdiction that is incredibly dangerous. I'll give you some examples. We have an Anchorage in Freeport, just outside of Freeport Harbor. In the last 6 months, we've had 3 incidences at the Anchorage that were completely avoidable if there was a pilot taking the ship to and from Anchorage. Those incidents were, number one, the BTC cable had an anchor dropped on it. Now, to a pilot that's experienced in this harbor, they know where the cables are like they know the back of their hands. But here's the system that is currently used so that you understand exactly what happens. A ship approaches the Freeport Harbor. They need to go to Anchorage. They call their agent. The agent says, we don't have pilots to Anchorage and Freeport as a practice, and I cannot give you a position. Because the ship says, okay, well, give me a position to anchor. The agent says, I cannot give you a position because if I give you a position, I'll be liable if anything happens. The ship then calls the company that they're coming to, whether it be the Freeport Harbor Company or Borco. The ship says, I need a pilot to anchor. The response from either the dispatch or control is, we do not have pilots to anchor as a practice, and I cannot give you a position because if I give you a position, I'd be liable for that position. So what happens? The ship is told that the Anchorage area exists at a certain longitude and latitude. Feel free. Park your ship. So 2 weeks ago, 2 ships parked themselves, and the current shifted. The ships drifted and collided with each other 2 weeks ago. In October, I think it was on a Monday, a ship dropped its anchor on the BTC cable, and by Thursday, the Formosa Falcon was beached on 8 Mile Rock. These are the amounts of incidents and the type of incidents that would cause intervention in most ports. In most ports, a government entity and or some oversight entity would intervene and do a full audit of the practices, because this kind of issue cannot just continue to happen. So essentially, we're at a point in Freeport where we have one Anchorage incident every 2 months. That's unacceptable. And the simple solution to these incidents are, if a pilot were aboard the ship, the pilot would simply park the ship in a responsible position. They would continue to monitor the ships, and when current changes, like what happened 2 weeks ago, the pilot would move the ship or tell the ship that they would have to pull up anchors and pull off because it's now dangerous to be at Anchorage. None of that happens now. In the case of the Formosa Falcon, when the ship beached because it was trying to do some sort of maneuver, I'm not a pilot, so I don't know all of the specifics, but 2 of our pilots that formerly worked for Borgo jumped on the tugboat, approached the ship, and they determined immediately that they could get the ship off the beach if they made a maneuver right away because of where the tide was at that particular point. The instruction from the Bahamas Oil Refining Corporation was, do not board the ship. If you board that ship, we will have to accept liability if anything goes wrong. Allow them to do what they do. The ship ended up stuck here for almost 2 weeks. 2 million gallons of fuel oil on board the ship. That is unacceptable by all standards. It is the sole example and clear situation that identifies to anyone that is a resident of Freeport why there should not be pilots as employees of companies. Companies consider the bottom line, pilots are public service agents. They are supposed to protect the port and protect public interest. 2 pilots that are instructed to leave a beached vessel that has run aground on 8 Mile Rock Beach within 10 minutes of having run aground with the possibility of moving the ship without damage, and the ship remains for almost 2 weeks with 2 million gallons of fuel oil, is not only irresponsible, but it's criminal. I say that to say that we are not doing what we are doing just because. 14 people don't resign their jobs and hand over all amounts of severances that they were supposed to be paid just because. The Grand Bahamian community must know that these are highly skilled and qualified professionals that have decided, unlike some of the other movements that we see where there is a grab for something or some sort of movement based on some sort of interest. In this case, you have a group of professionals that asked me to assist them for one sole purpose. They want to do this properly, and they want this to happen, because if it does not happen, the eventual case is there will be an incident in Freeport that will cause us greatly. And we've already experienced this, but we didn't even realize that it happened. Some of us did. The MSC, the name of the ship is the Poatia. MSC Poatia was supposed to do its maiden voyage to Freeport. It came, and what happened? The ship ran aground off the beach on a clear sky day because the pilot that was assigned to do the job was not a pilot experienced in what they were supposed to be doing. We have 2 pilots that were supposed to be the pilots on board. Neither of them were engaged to do the job. And so MSC decided that their fleet of 9 ships that they had planned to come to Freeport on a regular basis would not come. Why? Because you ran aground on the first trip. Why did that happen? Because company interest didn't see fit to provide the kind of training necessary and to assure that the pilot on board was properly trained. That's the kind of impact. So I read the editorials and I see some people saying, oh, well, why are these pilots trying to hold our companies hostage? Why are these pilots trying to tell the companies what to do? The fact of the matter is these pilots are attempting to protect the second largest transshipment port in the Western Hemisphere. And they are trying to protect whatever economic progress that Grand Bahama has that is going on right now. We are one incident away from this harbor possibly losing the majority of its business. one incident away. And we keep getting lucky. We keep getting lucky. The Formosa Falcon Beach, not a gallon leaked from the ship, but it was 2 million right on the beach. We keep getting lucky, but we cannot plan an industry on luck. The reason why the world didn't ask Freeport what the standards are for safety is because they decided on it a long time ago. And once they decided on it, they set it as the standard, and they expected the rest of the world to follow. It's called the International Maritime Organization. There's a partner organization called the International Maritime Pilots Association, and they have a document called A960 that outlines what pilotage associations should look like throughout the world. One of the most important things it calls for is a competent pilotage authority, that of which we do not have in the Bahamas. And that authority is responsible for appropriate licensing, standards, training, and also making sure that each port has the complement of pilots that it needs, trying to make sure that there's no competition amongst pilotage, because you have some jurisdictions where there are separate pilot associations competing against each other, and so some people take more risk than necessary. So pilotage is supposed to be organized non-competing, self-funded, which means that it's not a profit-generating business. At the end of the day, you cover your costs for your professionals, for your maintenance, for your training, for your staff, your employees, and your equipment, and you run a professional service. That is what the Bahamas Maritime Pilots Association is attempting to bring to Freeport. That is what we will bring to Freeport, by what Bahamians say, by hook or by crook. It's coming. We brought this gentleman here. We've met with government today so that he can inform the government as to what the standards are that the Bahamas has already signed on to with IMO, and so that you understand that relationship. We have, is it the second or the third largest ship registry?
Third.
The third. We have the third largest ship registry at the International Maritime Organization. The Bahamas has a strong presence at IMO. As Mr. Cutmore says, we sit in the front. We have an office in New York and an office in London, assuring that our interests are protected. However, when it comes to following and being in compliance with IMO standards, in terms of pilotage, we have definitely dropped the ball. We've not made certain that our legislation is alongside what IMO requires as minimum requirements. And so we have situations in this country today where the harbor company and BORCO are saying, as if it is not verifiable, that they have a competent team to take over pilotage when the pilot resignations take effect on the 28th. As of December 31st, there were 18 pilots in this jurisdiction piloting for the volume of ships that are in Freeport. Those 18 pilots found it difficult to make that happen with the complement of 18 pilots. There were more pilots necessary to be trained. As of March 28th, when our resignations take effect, there will be 4 pilots to do what the 18 pilots were doing. Not only is that not sustainable, it is not a full complement of pilots to do the work, as they have said in the public, and it is uninsurable. We have alerted the P&I clubs so that they are aware of our position. The P&I clubs have responded to us that not only do they support IMO standards for independent pilotage, but in some cases they were under the impression that it was happening in Freeport. They were under that impression because both companies run what we call dummy companies. The Freeport Maritime Services Company, which is the company under which the pilots pilot for Freeport Harbor Company, and that is the company that signs the towage agreements with the ships. That company is posed as an independent group to provide pilotage, to stay the liability from the company. BORCO has a company called BORTO, and that company is an independent company providing the pilotage for the company. So apparently the companies are aware of how it works, but the suggestion is that they cannot fit that into their business model at this time. We implore people in Freeport to pay attention to this issue. On the 28th of March, either this port will shut down or we will have independent pilotage. Those are the options, so that people are clear. And why I say that is because 4 pilots under no circumstances can do the work that 18 pilots did, number one. Number two, the training necessary for pilots, as laid out by Freeport Harbor rules, is that there needs to be 200 moves per clearance for a person to receive their training. Well, on average, Freeport Harbor does about 300 moves per month. So a pilot that is going to train to get all of the clearances necessary to be a fully trained pilot would not only have to present the credentials, but they would have to pilot almost every ship that comes through the harbor company in order to make themselves the pilot that can do it. And there is no suggestion under which that is safe. There is a young man that is a pilot training at the Freeport Harbor Company today. He went to Maritime school. He's a very competent young man. He was trained by one of our senior pilots. He's been at the harbor for a year. He has 200 feet clearance. The average ship traveling through the harbor is 700 to 900 feet, which means that it's taken him a year with all of the necessary prerequisites to get to 200 feet. This is the kind of time it takes for you to become a pilot and to be trained as a pilot. So the suggestion that on the 28th they would have hired new trainees and trained them up to be able to pilot the ships is not only irresponsible, but it's completely out of order. The other suggestion is that they will bring in pilots and those pilots will replace our pilots tomorrow. I was in Tampa, actually in Palm Beach, Florida, and I met with the Florida harbor pilots. That's the harbor pilots for all harbors in the state of Florida. And one of the captains, she's a female pilot, she said to me, I've been a pilot for 20 years. And if my husband takes a job in Fort Lauderdale, and we have to move to Port Everglades, and I'm currently piloting in Tampa, I have to apply to the state of Florida. I have to take a test, submit all of my credentials, and be accepted all over again as a trainee in the Port Everglades port. Because a pilot, no matter how experienced, once they change ports, is a trainee all over again, because pilots master the port. Their skill is port specific, and separate from that, they master ship handling. So while she may be an expert at ship handling, she has not mastered the port. And she has to do that in order to be a competent pilot in that jurisdiction. So we had an example where Borco, a few years back, brought a group of Dutch pilots into this jurisdiction. Lester is laughing because he is one of the Bahamian pilots who, when the Dutch experts came, he had to train them because they did not know how to operate in this particular harbor. Now, if they took a large vessel out to sea, they could maneuver it and do all kinds of spins and twists. But that has nothing to do with what a pilot's job is. The master of the ship handles the ship in open ocean, in the deep sea. The pilot handles the ship in shallow waters and in the harbor. And that is the skill that we are addressing. Half of the issue is that pilots have been working for the companies and treated as line staff for so long that the Grand Bahama community doesn't quite understand what the skill is that the pilots have. So let me give you an example. If you have a hospital and you have a team of surgeons, lung surgeons, heart surgeons, cardiothoracic surgeons, any other type of surgeon, and all of a sudden all of the surgeons resign from that hospital would be held up for perhaps a week, maybe 2 weeks, as they recruit new surgeons to do the job. But you could easily get a new surgeon. If you had nurses that strike, obviously they would just replace the nurses. But it is easier for that hospital to replace the surgeons, as specific as their skill is, than it is for any harbor to replace all of their pilots. Because the pilots take years to gain the kind of experience that it takes to be able to pilot in the harbor. It is simply not responsible for any organization that calls themselves a business in the maritime industry to suggest to any community of people that they could replace their pilots. 18 out of 18, 14 of those pilots can be replaced in a matter of a month. So that is where we are. I want to invite Mr. Nick Cutmore to come forward. He is the Secretary General of the International Maritime Pilots Association. He is much better versed on this topic than I am. I'm versed in Freeport. He's dealt with pilots all over the world in 55 countries, and he's going to talk to us a bit about how piloting works around the world, and also what his basic look at what we have in Freeport is, and how we can work on fixing it. Mr. Nick Cutmore.
Thank you. I'm not sure what I've got to say now that you've given such an introduction. My name is Nick Cutmore, and I represent most of the world's pilots at IMO. And maybe I'll give some of you an oversight. IMO is a UN agency, the only one in London. It deals with maritime affairs. Shipping is an international business. That's why the UN run it. It's structured in such a way that the so-called flag states, which Bahamas is one, and a very vocal one, are represented there. There are 164 states there. And at the back sit the technical bodies, like the pilots, the ship owners, the oil majors, etc., all manner of people. So I know your delegation. In fact, we've crossed swords with them. And I'll come on to this a little bit later, but I do find it slightly astonishing seeing their performance at IMO and the statements that they make as a flag compared to their function and or perhaps lack of function here in terms of their port state responsibilities. The pilots are represented at IMO for purely professional reasons. IMPA is not a trade union. We are a professional technical body. We are only interested in safety outcomes. That's why this interests us so much. When we were contacted by Erin and we saw that you were thinking about a more professional body and you were thinking about training, I thought, wow, that's interesting. There was no mention about conditions of staff here. It was all about the job, doing the job better. And having been here, having had discussions and then been to your government offices today, I have to say I'm shocked. I have to be blunt. Some of the things I've heard sort of make your teeth curl, really. There's an absence of a great many things that the international shipping community might be expecting to find here. Let me give you a few examples. There are various conventions at IMO. You're mostly familiar with SOLAS, the Safety of Life at Sea convention. You see it on life jackets, SOLAS approved. And in fact, pilot ladders have to be SOLAS approved. Then there's a convention that others of you will be familiar with, STCW, Standards for Training and Certification of Watchkeeping. Some of you here have a certificate under the STCW convention. And then there are other instruments that IMO discusses and agrees. And the critical one for you is this resolution, A960. It deals with training, certification and operational requirements for marine pilots. Very simple. It's only about a dozen pages to it. It's crystal clear. It gives things like a curriculum for pilot training, deals with the structure, which we heard about earlier, the need for a competent pilotage authority within a nation. There's a great deal in A960 that is missing from what I can see here. It's not the fault of the people doing the work. It's a big gap And as I say, it's very hard to reconcile the Bahamian, maybe I should say the Bahamian Registry's performance at IMO, because I do feel that it's a registry-driven desk rather than a port state-driven desk. Is that making sense to you?
Yes.
I'll be very blunt. I don't come from Europe or from the UK I don't want to patronise or lecture you. It's a beautiful place and I'm very envious. But really, your politicians need to get a grip on things. To hear of a laden tanker broadside on a beach for 2 weeks, that is absolutely staggering. People certainly in Europe, politicians would lose their job for something like that. People are either resign voluntarily or they're thrown out of post. That's unimaginable. But to have it repeated, not the tanker incident, but other incidents, and have a succession of them, as we said to the good minister this morning, you're riding Providence a bit hard here. You know, something's going to give. You've got this fabulous environment here. Ships inside don't carry nice clean cargoes. I don't know if any of you have seen what crude oil does to beaches. We've had it in the UK more than once. Gosh, we've had several. The Torrey Canyon was probably the most famous because it was one of the first big tankers to end up in rocks off Cornwall. The oil pollution was so bad that the Air Force bombed the wreck and the oil in an attempt to burn it off. That was before they got into chemicals. This was early on. And it wasn't until there had been a succession of instances like the Brer, north of Scotland, the Amoco Cadiz off the coast of France. People in Europe are very cognizant of what crude oil does to beaches, and our beaches are nothing compared to yours. So I've heard a lot of things today, and I really want to applaud what I'm hearing from this putative association, that you're interested in better standards and training. I did ask this morning about standards of training, and again I was shocked. It's not the fault of the people here, but it exemplifies the problem of commerce being involved in running an operation. Private enterprise does not do safety very well. It's not in their, it might be in their business interest if they kill too many people. And if you think I'm being flippant, again, I come from a country that privatised its rail safety. After about 30 or 40 people had been killed in various train accidents, the government thought we got that wrong. So they shut the company dealing with rail maintenance and safety and replaced it for a not-for-profit body. Result, problem solved. So getting back to training, the absence of training for pilots here is fairly shocking, I have to say. Some of these guys haven't been on a course for 5 years. Correct me if this is wrong. Some of them, some of the topics that I brought up, only 1 or 2 could put their hands up having been on a suitable training course. IMO has mandated some of this training. These cruise ships coming into port now do not carry paper charts. They carry what's called an ECDIS, an electronic chart. You need to be trained to use something like that. IMO knows that. Officers have to go on specific courses for the type of equipment on their ship. Now, because there are something like 30 of these different manufacturers about, it was recognised by IMO that pilots need to go on what we call a generic course. But I think only a couple of people put their hand up this morning when I asked the question. About 2, ECDIS training. Your administration should hang their head in shame. The companies. I don't know who to point the finger at, because actually there isn't a structure. There's a big void there. These cruise ships coming in now do not have conventional propulsion systems that many people grew up with or are experienced in. They use podded propulsion. The propulsion itself is quite simple, but the control systems are quite complex, and you have to understand how and how to operate them, because you can actually end up with two pods fighting each other under the hull. There's another example for you. So I think I explained it to the Minister this morning. Piloting a ship is not like learning to drive a car. You'll be able to drive any car, and you'll be able to drive a car for the next 40 years because they'll all be pretty well the same. Shipping is a dynamic business. It's moving on with technologies, and people have to train on the new technologies. And some of it, yes, is nice to have training, but some of it is mandated. The international community is mandating it, but it doesn't seem to have happened here. Now, you have people, ship-owning communities, moving their ships around the world, trying to manage their assets as best as possible at minimal risk. They would never dream that trading here could possibly involve risk as they might find in the more obvious places on the planet. I hope I'm not overstating this, but I think your politicians need a good shake-up, and I did plead with them this morning. I did use that word. Please do something. You have had so many wake-up calls. When you have a big accident, that'll be too late. So something needs to be done, and now. And you've forced the issue, and I applaud you, because it's a very unique situation where people have put their jobs on the line, not to earn more money or to do anything similar, but actually to say, we want to do a better job, and that's laudable, very laudable, and that's why I'm so keen and happy to be here. Conscious I do drone on a bit, so are there any areas that you'd like me to expand upon, or would it be helpful if I took questions?
Yeah, questions would be good. And also to talk about the cost associated with incidents.
The Costa Concordia, I mentioned a figure this morning and some people shook their heads in disbelief. The removal of the Costa Concordia, I know it's being done a difficult way, is presently estimated to cost in excess of $1 billion. Now that's just taking a hull away. The cargo of that hull mostly swam ashore or got away in lifeboats. But imagine a tanker of that size. Tankers come a lot bigger than the Costa Concordia. So you wouldn't be worried about getting rid of the hull. You'd be thinking, how many billion barrels did that spread on our beaches? Maybe you might think I'm exaggerating, but I've seen the density of traffic here, and I've heard enough about the failings in structure and procedures, the absence of clarity and of transparency to really feel strongly about this. So shipping accidents, they're not cheap. The Costa Concordia, yes, is high end, but mostly you're talking several $100 million. I can give you a good example, actually, from the US. Do you remember a tanker called the Exxon Valdez in Alaska? Okay. The spillage of that, there was no pilot on board. It was determined, it was a company business. We don't need pilots. The captain actually, Captain Hazelwood, was cutting his toenails at the point the thing ran aground. The dispersal of oil was a nightmare because the oil was so cold in the surrounding waters of Alaska. A lot of people there relied on their on fishing for their livelihoods. That was the end of their livelihoods there. And the oil was particularly difficult to remove because, I don't know if you know, often oil on water, a lot of it evaporates and it can sink down and it's digested sometimes by microbes. But the Exxon Valdez cargo was particularly difficult to remove. The cost of removing the oil, compensation to the fishermen and all the other parties and all the other costs would have paid for all pilots in the United States in perpetuity. That's something to get your head round. Okay. One of the things that happens in the States, as has happened to BP over the Macondo blowout is they have to post a bond. Okay, that bond is put in a bank and it accrues interest. Well, actually, I'm trying to think of the name. It was Exxon with the valve that obviously includes in the name. The bond earned interest and eventually ended up outstripping the costs that came to court. But the fact was, it was so big, the bond and the on-costs, that the American pilots, and there's more than 1,200 American pilots, did a little calculation and said actually with that interest accruing on that bond, that would have just paid for pilotage in the US to have been free in perpetuity. There's some numbers to get your heads around about the possibility of marine casualties. I don't think people have any idea about the liability issues.
Any questions?
Do you want to explain in terms of where there's competitive pilotage where there's more incident versus where there's just one single association or pilot authority?
One of the things we believe in is, you'd be quite surprised for what you might have thought as a trade association. We're not a trade union, but we do want the strictest possible regulation. And we've found that by experience, that where you have competing groups of pilots competing for work, you do get an increase in accidents. And it's not an opinion or a thought or a guess on our part, it's a fact. Ships are insured by a mutual self-insurance arrangement that the ship owners run called P&I clubs, Protection Indemnity Clubs, and they pay claims. There's about a dozen clubs, and they keep very detailed statistics. And one of the things they noticed and asked us about was, why are there so many instances with a pilot on board in Argentina? And we said, that's because in Buenos Aires there are 4 competing groups of pilots. Well, if you imagine here 4 different companies competing for work, training, quality, that wouldn't be an issue. You're trying to undercut the other guy to get the work. If you're not cheaper than him, you don't get the job. The agents give it to the cheapest person. So, hence our experiences, which most recently, actually not so far from here, came to light in Colombia in a new berth at Buenaventura, a berth built by T.C. Buen for containers. And there, pilots, and I'll tell you a little bit more in a minute, but the main pilots group there said to their regulators, there is no turning room off this berth. We need more room to be able to turn these ships safely between the berth and the bank on the other side, which had been dredged. And there was a lot of difficulty and argument about it. And in the end, the national body, the National Safety Agency, supported the pilots and said, you're right. And with that, the berth owner, who just paid a lot of money, obviously, to build the berth, took them to court. And the judge said, commerce is more important than safety. That was his words. I'm trying to think of the date. It's in our magazine. There's a picture there of the Maersk Kensington embedded in the quay. There was a competing group of pilots on the scene. Said, we could do that job. Now that's cost Mr. Maersk a lot of money, not just for the damage to his hull. You can't see where the bulbous valves have gone, but I don't want to imagine the shape of it. And there's the berth damage as well. It's a perfect example of where competition and commerce takes you in a safety environment. I want to go back to the opening comment. Pilotage is not a business, it's a public safety service. It's here for the community and for the environment. And ships get brought in and berthed safely and promptly as part of that. But it's a public business which the governments and the public need to take care of and nurture. And it doesn't need to make money either, it just needs to cover its cost and make sure its people are trained and rostered and in good physical condition to perform this work. Sorry, sir.
Yes, I want you to touch on the topic of the pilot with the medical condition that we spoke about in the meeting this morning, being recruited by Freeport Harbor to make, as a part of their contingency plan, to make up for the pilots that are resigning.
I'm not going to talk about an individual person, but I'll tell you the framework. IMO specifically sets out the health standards for seafarers. It's in STCW. It's there, every last bit. And A960 says that generally administrations must administer for marine pilots the same health standards as deck officer certificate holders under the convention. It's as simple as that. You must have doctors here in the Bahamas who carry out the STCW medical certificates. A pilot just goes through the same thing, more or less. It's possible to say to the doctor, well, there are possibilities for saying, well, a pilot is only on a ship for 2 or 3 hours, blah, blah, blah. But being a pilot is training physically and mentally. I'm preaching mostly to the converted here. You have to climb not from the waterline to the deck, you have to climb from the waterline to the bridge. And I'm exhausted when I do it. But then, at the moment that physical climb has finished, you are expected to take the conduct of the vessel's navigation and use your brain 100%. That is not a situation where you want someone. We're not talking about a marginal situation here. Someone with an ingrown toenail or something. We're talking about someone with a serious health complaint, and it's for a medical practitioner to look at STCW and say you don't fit, or you fit, or you don't fit into that. It's as simple as that. It's not subjective.
I don't think I was clear enough. Yeah. I meant to say, they're taking a pilot that was responsible for one of the biggest accidents, maritime mishaps around here, that I was there for that. I'm taking him into another pilot association to work, to another company. He crashed at Conclave, but they're taking him over at Freeport Harbor to work. Isn't that I want you to touch on the negligence of it.
Well, was there an investigation? Who investigated it?
I think there's still an ongoing investigation.
I mean, again, elsewhere there are investigations into accidents. I don't think the name of the line's gone blank. Container vessel in San Francisco. And the pilot was investigated thoroughly, and he was found to be taking medicinal drugs rather to the excess. He lost his license. That's it. Finished. I'm sorry, an investigation has to look at people. I don't know how long ago this accident was and why the investigation has taken so long. If there was any doubt about the pilot's competence, in the case of the pilot in San Francisco, John Cota, he was just suspended. He's on the payroll, but he's suspended. He doesn't pilot any more ships. And again, there ought to be rigour in the national structure. I'm sorry to keep coming back to this, but there's a big void here, it seems, right from the people at the top of the tree, the politicians here, down to the people like you doing the job. There's nothing in between. There's no structure or system that you understand, and there's nothing in place to deal with accident investigation or reporting or dealing with the outcomes. I mean, one of the purposes of accident investigation isn't to blame people, it's to find out what went wrong and then to try and make things better so that doesn't happen again. It's not a witch hunt, but I can't comment on whether there's been what the report should have said. but certainly the fitness of the person as part of it. Most big flags run an accident investigation unit, marine accident investigation unit, and you can, the UK one, you can Google it. Just Google MAIB. You can read them for years gone by. You'll see in there every person involved in an accident. They look at their hours of work, for instance, and then they try and see if there are issues about stress, you know, if their circadian rhythm was affected by working a lot of night shifts and that sort of stuff. The human factors are a big input to accident investigation. So I'm sorry, it's another failing really if that hasn't happened. That's the best I can do really. So.
Yes, the international conventions that the Bahamas government signed on, is there any enforceable aspects of the credentials that they, or standards they agree to maintain coming from those international organizations?
Some of those conventions are of different status. It's expected that people conform to those standards because it's almost reciprocal. The Bahamas wants tonnage to come here, which is safe. So it's expected in turn that the Bahamas will send its tonnage elsewhere on the planet, which will be in the same safe condition. The main regulatory regime for enforcing a lot of instruments is what we call port state control. So, and I don't know quite how it works here. Who exercises port state control function in the Bahamas? The registry?
Yes, but and the port department.
Yeah, I mean, these guys have to climb a ladder, which is now required. We got a new resolution through 2 years ago through IMO that has changes to the ladder requirements. They have to be certificated for the first time. They have to be certificated by a class society. Now, if the pilot doesn't find a certificated ladder, he can report that to port state control and they can detain the ship. I don't know how often that happens, but that applies to a whole range of other measures. Port state control is supposed to, for instance, carry out periodically a certain number of random inspections of ships. They tend to look at the rustier ones, but you would be looking at the documentation for the officers. You would be amazed. False documentation is a big issue. People carrying certificates that they've got on the internet. Other areas that inspectors like to look at is navigation equipment and fire control systems and health and hygiene. It's amazing what needs to be looked at. So that's the main area of enforcement as far as ships are concerned.
In regards to the education process, I know from casual observation, I'm not involved in any of the maritime, but from an economic standpoint in my country, from a casual observation, we seem to focus on the registry aspect and not tap into the potential of the shipping or commerce aspect. Is there an education process? Because essentially we have a very small port department that focuses almost exclusively with that, and we don't have the ministry. We have, I call them 5-year celebrities that sits in place in particular ministries, and they go on. Is there an education process to broaden the scope of what you have to do?
Well, I think and this is a personal perspective, the only people I see in London on your desk are the registry people. Now, that's an internal thing. I don't want to tell you how to organise your country. But presumably, on most nations, there are a mix of disciplines come in. The UK, there will be a mix. Well, the UK registry is nothing like the size of the Bahamas, but there will be people from ports and various other maritime disciplines there on the desk. I have to say, I've enjoyed this trip from one point of view, because pilots have had we had quite a bitter dispute with the Bahamian registry about 2 years ago at IMO. And what I found out here leads me to be in a very strong position. We discussed this earlier. I mean, if I'd have known about the issues of the absence of training, for instance, about the health issues and the number of accidents, then we would have we did bury the registry, but we would have done a more complete job. I was furious to find out they are preaching to us about standards of pilotage, but not practicing them at home. And I'm happy to be quoted in the media saying that.
Just one final question. Concerning the growth of the registry, is there a ratio based on tonnage, volume, and everything that has to be maintained from a global standard?
No. I'm sorry, I'm not.
No, for instance, as we increase tonnage, and we have the 14 pilots or 18 pilots, and we begin to tap into that, is there...
If the number of pilots was related to tonnage, there'd be thousands of pilots.
Okay, volumes.
Sorry. The number of pilots is related to your traffic within the port, but the Bahamian registry is huge. But a lot of Bahamian registered vessels never come near.
That's what I'm saying. Is there a balance between the traffic and the amount of pilots that you have to have?
Yes.
But from an international standard point?
There's no international standard because there are no two ports the same. We always say to people, pilotage is a port-specific issue. Every port is unique. You need the number of pilots that you need. Now again, this is another hole in the system here, in the absence of some competent authority that sits down with these guys and says the traffic levels are currently this, we need a roster to cover that. How long is a transit typically? How many transits can you do per shift before your performance drops off? You can't be a pilot, 24 hours, 12 hours. It's it's physically, but most of all mentally draining. You need downtime to come back to it. So you need a roster with downtime, holidays, and people on training. Training isn't a 5-minute thing. These people need to go on week-long courses, and probably they'll have to travel abroad to do it. You need a roster big enough to accommodate that, and the people to advise you on that are the pilots.
Saying that, just as you're speaking about downtime, so come the 28th of this month, we're supposed to have 2 pilots working 24 hours a day.
It's nuts.
Is that possible? Is that even conceivable?
You don't have to ask. We all know the answer to that. It's just not. But that's something. I'm conscious here that I'm coming, and I don't want to tell you what to do. A lot of this is in your own, or not in your hands, but your leaders' hands. They've got to, and they've got the answer, really. They've been presented effectively with a structure and told that's what happens elsewhere on the planet. I'm comfortable with what you're doing because I see it everywhere. And we were asked this morning by the minister, he said, can you give me some examples of this? And I said, France, Holland, Germany. It's, there is one pilotage body, and the government delegates that body in a formal piece of legislation to run pilotage, and they have to account back up the tree. It's simple.
If the standards that we are trying to get to are not raised, is it possible we could be cited by IMO? And how would that affect our rates?
No, you wouldn't be cited by that. IMO doesn't work like that. It's a more consensual sort of body. But what makes people nervous is accidents. And if you get if that tanker, for instance, had spilled oil, it may have been a good thing. It's a terrible thing to have said, but it may have shaken people up in Nassau. Thought, oh, is there some structural defect in what we've got here? But all the while this stuff is seemingly kept quiet as well. Nothing much is going to change, but your leaders have seemingly been presented with a structure for the future. So I hope that leads to something.
Is there a ratio between near misses and incidents or accidents in the industry?
No, because we got involved in what is a near miss some time ago, but the problem is pilotage is about bringing ships very close to other things, but you're doing it carefully and successfully. And what appears to somebody to be a near miss, to a pilot is, well, that's what I do every day. I hope that's not too facetious, but again, it's like it's like the point I made earlier, no two ports are the same. Are you aware of the entrance to the port of Houston? There's a very narrow dredge channel, which really only one ship can be in at a time. The pilots in the Houston ship channel pass each other, and they pass each other by approaching head on. Again, Google it. It's called the Houston Chicken Run. Okay, and they approach each other, and then they both bear off at the same moment, and they ride each other's hydrostatic wave to keep apart and pass each other. Now, any sane person would look at that and say, accident. But they train, they do that. Now, I'll give you an example of how sophisticated training can be. It's not, pilot training is not classroom training. The first thing for a pilot is mentoring by another pilot. Then you can lead on to simulation. You get quite sophisticated ship simulators. But there is a third strand of pilot training which is quite common around the world, model training. And when I say models, they are as big as this room. They are scale models of ships' hulls, scale displacement and scale power, and you sit in them and you manoeuvre them. You can imagine a model as big as this room with an engine the size of a washing machine. You're getting an idea how difficult they are to manoeuvre. They weigh tons. The Houston pilots practice on those, and if they get another class of ship, then the colleges who run these training facilities will model that new class, and then they'll train on it. Pilots have to be training through their entire careers. You don't train at the beginning and then say, I know everything. You need to be constantly training on the technology, the new propulsion systems, new hull forms.
Do you know of any other areas where pilots aren't independent, that they work for commercial entities?
Yes, I do. Yeah, but mostly that's where you have problems, like in Argentina. There is another example in, and it's a weird one. In Australia, Australia is a federation of states. All the states of Australia prohibit competition in pilotage. But off the coast of Australia, you have the Great Barrier Reef, which is the responsibility of the federal authorities in Canberra. They are responsible for pilotage. They permit 2 companies to compete there. So you've probably seen some of the accidents there. There've been a number of ships. That's priceless coral reef that these ships are running into, irreplaceable. And we've been down to Canberra, and they're politicians. They're wringing their hands. We don't know what to do, but they can never go back. They find themselves in a bind. So Argentina, Australia, companies are can you just repeat the question again, because I don't want to be...
Like how we are here,
yeah.
The pilots work for particular commercial companies.
Yeah.
Is it a norm?
No, it's not a norm. No, the model, the norm is one group of pilots providing service either to a country or to ports within that country. Non-competitive, strictly regulated, non-profit making, and that's the norm. But there are places in Saudi Arabia, the oil companies run terminals there and want the pilots to be employees, but it's a matter of control. A lot of ship owners and terminal operators resent the independence of pilots because they view it as part of the supply chain which they want to control. Cruise lines particularly load pilots for maybe making independent adjustments that might affect scheduling and that sort of stuff. Sorry, madam.
So with that said, I'm going to be just an example right now. I'm hired by a company today to bring in ships. Can I just go to that company, to that port, and start bringing in ships, or is there a period of training that I need to go through before I'm allowed to bring in any ship?
Preferably you've had a lot of training.
So what would, on an average, what would be the time period for training before I'm allowed to bring in?
It would be in the order of years. Yeah, I mean, you would be talking in a port taking big vessels, certainly in Europe, maybe 4 or 5 years for an unlimited license. Normally the training begins with your certification at fairly low level for quite small ships, and it depends whether it's length, whether the port is concerned about length or draft, and then you'll go up in stages. I don't know if it's the same here, but that's the norm elsewhere. You might have, say, 3 stages to go through, and you will be examined at every stage about your competence, but it's years and years. And the example that was given about in the US is very interesting, because I know an English guy, John Chadwick, who was an Alaska pilot, and he felt it was too cold, so he went to San Francisco, and he said, could I work here? And they said, sure, you could start as an apprentice. And he said, I got an Alaska license. They said, we'll knock a year off for that, you only have to do 4. That's the truth.
Can you comment on pilots that are not citizens of this state? So pilots sort of being imported into other places.
Well, the situation of pilots is quite interesting in that if you are a port receiving a foreign flag vessel or even a home flag vessel, the pilot is your first national going on board that vessel. That's quite an interesting situation that people have latched onto for security reasons. One of your nationals is going on that ship long before it comes into port and may pose a threat to the port. And when I say a threat, I don't mean necessarily a terrorist threat. A pilot may go on board a ship, and again it's something that's encouraged, and you'll see it in the IMO documentation A960. A pilot is not compelled to bring a ship into port. It's his choice. It's another reason why he needs to be individual and independent. If he gets on board a ship, for instance, with an inoperative radar, he might say, Captain, we're going to anchor out here till you get that fixed. I don't want to go in with that. It's illegal for the ship to sail anyway, but the pilot can exercise that. So if he's carrying a potentially hazardous cargo, and it doesn't have to be oil, it could be a particularly noxious chemical, and he doesn't feel the ship is equipped as it should be, it's his prerogative not to take it in. And it won't endanger your environment or your infrastructure because of having that national go on board. Now, I know what we're driving at here, and I have to say, I come from a part of the world where I'm not British anymore, I'm a European. And all Europeans are born equal now, and it does mean one of the cornerstones of the Treaty of Rome is the mobility of labour. So in fact, in European countries we do have pilots from, I'll be brutal on this, we do have pilots who move between countries, they're not necessarily nationals. But nevertheless, it's still a very interesting situation that of the pilot as a gatekeeper. He's got on that ship miles out, he sees what he sees, and he can make a decision to say, we're going to anchor here, Captain, we're not going here. And that ought to be his decision. If he's a company pilot, he can't say that.
Based on what you've seen and what you've discussed with these pilots here in the Bahamas, will you outright say that they are really not up to the standard internationally as far as training ethics, as far as safety ethics, as far as the rule of thumb for maritime pilots?
The system is not fit for purpose. I don't know. I've only met these guys today, so I don't know anything about their backgrounds or their certification and training. The system is rotten, okay? And I can be quoted on that. There's no structure, as far as I can see, about how they're employed, their conditions, how they're going to be trained, certificated, and maybe disciplined if they have an accident. That's all missing. And surely the government here would want a system that was transparent.
Would you say that that system is key to the growth and development of the industry?
Yeah, if you're running along a ragged edge at the moment, and you're not only will your industry not grow, it'll if people find coming here with cargoes is dangerous or expensive, they'll stop coming here and go maybe transship in, I don't know, Curacao or Aruba, I don't know. Or there would be questions asked, and then your government would be thinking, this is impacting on us financially. Pilots can bring certainty with safety that benefits financially, not them, but the port. It's strange for me that the port people don't get it. A safe and expeditious system, it's win-win for everybody, isn't it?
Should be.
These guys aren't asking for more money, not as far as I know. They're asking for a better system so that everybody in the community is going to benefit. And I'm saying they're not asking for the moon, they're only asking for what the rest of the planet is expecting to find here. I'm sorry I'm being a bit rude here. You did ask me to. Yeah, madam.
I'm just curious, you indicated that you had a strategy that you shared with the minister or structure that would be able to easily replace what is not in place. What is the time frame or the projected time frame that would be necessary in order to implement this strategy in order to bring our standards of our marine pilots up to IMO standards?
What goes into that strategy is already down on paper, I think that's fair to say. Yeah. And it's what the world expects in terms of what IMO has set down. So the time frame is only as fast as somebody writes you some piece of primary or secondary legislation or a bylaw. I don't know how you do it here. So
I mean in the actual hands-on training that they would have to go through, because Mr. Ferguson indicated earlier that on March 28th, there's two options: shut down or a seamless transition with this new pilotage association. So I'm just curious, because even on the 28th, if this pilotage association transitions, they would still be at the same safety levels that they're at now. Yeah. So I'm just curious to know, because I see this as a positive situation. So I'm just curious to know what would be the time frame for this transition in any event. To take the strategy off paper and actually make it working.
You're talking about, I think, a fairly narrow strand, which is the training aspect. Right. And I'd have to say that would be a long-term thing. Okay. Because these guys have got to keep the port running. Right. You only have a certain training margin for them to be released. As I say, most pilot training, the ECDIS course is a week. You would spend a week on an ASIPOD course. You might spend a week on bridge resource management, which is a critical area. So you can do the numbers that you might think initially you would want to send every pilot on at least 3 weeks training. So multiply that by the number of pilots. That's maybe one person for a year in a training margin. But other associations are operating at that sort of level. This is a high-risk business, and it needs investment in training. So yes, it would be a longer-term thing, but the short-term, to me, is quite easily resolved if there's a political will. I wish you good fortune, because I think you're very brave, what you've done, and I think that shows commitment to a good cause, that you've given up such a lot for this particular point, and it's very unselfish, and I think it's laudable. So I wish you well, and I hope to see you down the road as members of IMPA in the future. So thank you very much.
If anyone has any questions of the association, we can take those questions at this time. If anyone wants to ask about any particulars, details, challenges, or concerns you have with the Bahamas Maritime Pilots Association. Yes, ma'am.
Yes, I'd like you to explain, because I've been just following along the trail.
Yes.
And I'd like you to explain the situation with reference to the licensing from the Port Authority. What is the status on that?
1986 is when the Bahamas, when Freeport Pilotage Company established their license with the Grand Bahama Port Authority. We have kept that license up to date and up to whatever requirements the Port Authority has asked. Now, in 1996, Dave Duncan, the port director at the time, wrote a letter to a Clifton Ritchie and the other persons involved in the Freeport Pilotage Company, asking for Freeport Pilotage Companies, now pay attention to this very carefully. Freeport Pilotage Company had been in the business from 1986. The port director wrote Freeport Pilotage Company to ask for their assistance to get involved in the business of pilotage in the harbor. So a company named the Freeport Harbor Company, represented by the port director, wrote to our company, which was 10 years prior to them being even interested in the business, to have assistance to get into the business. The suggestion that we are not a legitimate and fully licensed entity in the port area is nonsense, number one. Number two, Godfrey Smith, as the CEO of Hutchison Properties, the container port, and Freeport Harbor Company, is completely outside of his ability when he writes letters, as he has, saying that the Bahamas Maritime Pilots Association cannot do business in this jurisdiction. Here is why. And he CC'd Orlando Forbes, the port director. Mr. Smith is obviously not aware of how things operate in Freeport as per the Hawksbill Creek Agreement and the Freeport Harbor rules. And we wrote to his attorney, and his attorney concurs that she needs to bring him up to date as to how it works with Freeport Harbor rules and the Hawksbill Creek Agreement. And here's how it works. The port director is appointed by the Grand Bahama Port Authority. According to the Grand Bahama Port Authority and the agreement, the Hawksbill Creek Agreement, the Port Authority in Freeport is the Grand Bahama Port Authority. Now, at some point, Mr. Smith confused himself with the Port Authority and Freeport Harbor Company, maybe because his office is down by the port. But there is no confusion. The Port Authority is the Grand Bahama Port Authority. Once a company is licensed by that company to operate in a particular business, like pilotage, then that company is authorized in the port area to operate in that business. We have said license from the Grand Bahama Port Authority. The port director is appointed by the Grand Bahama Port Authority and approved by the Minister of Transportation. So the port director, Orlando Forbes, is the only person that can speak as to what happens in the port area, not the CEO of the Freeport Harbor Company. And that port director is bound by the Hawksbill Creek Agreement, which is where the Grand Bahama Port Authority gets its powers, and they exercise those powers to give us a license to operate. What that means is the port director has to honor that license. Now, anything short of that means that we will file suit, obviously, against the Grand Bahama Port Authority for neglect of duty and for violating the law. We know that they intend to illegitimize our license, but our license is paid up to date. Our company has a current annual return from the Registrar General's office, and we fully intend to be in business.
Do you have all the required signatures on that document?
Yes. When you say required signatures, you mean from
Signatures
the Grand
from-
Bahama Port
From the
Authority?
Port Authority, from the
We-
port director, from everybody.
First of all, we don't need the signature of the port director. We have a license already.
Okay.
What has been suggested by Freeport Harbor Company is that we need Freeport Harbor Company's approval to operate in the harbor. That is also incorrect. The Port Authority is the Grand Bahama Port Authority. Once you have a license from that Port Authority, you have a license to operate. Freeport Harbor Company is a licensee. Freeport Pilotage Company is a licensee. A licensee cannot be forced to seek the approval of a competitive licensee to operate their business. It's ludicrous.
Right.
So if I wanted to get in the security business, Ian Roll cannot tell me that I have to call Palm Security to get their approval to enter the security business.
Another thing we're getting from the media is that this is a all of a sudden move by you guys.
Yeah.
Have you, prior to you sending in your resignation, made attempts to make it not either now or the port closes or you go with us prior to your resignation?
Well, first, let's start with the history. So, again, Freeport Pilotage Company from 1986. Nothing very all of a sudden about that. The other thing is the port director himself was an employee, correct me if I'm wrong, of Freeport Pilotage Company. So he's very aware of how independent pilotage works. The other thing is that we went about a process over the last 9 months of forming the relationships with Mr. Cutmore, with Mike Watson, the president of the American Pilots and also the president of the International Maritime Pilots Association. We went particularly to Houston pilots and to the New York and New Jersey pilots because they service ships that pull up to the berths that Buckeye has in those two ports. Buckeye's home port is Houston, and their other port, Perth Amboy Port Reading, is in New York. So we went particularly to form relationships with those pilots to make certain that we were up to the standard needed to be met to service that company, and that we understood the relationship between the companies and the pilots. We also formed a relationship with the Savannah pilots, the Delaware pilots, the Florida Harbor pilots, which is each port in the state of Florida, from Jacksonville, Cape Canaveral, Port Everglades, Key Biscayne, and we have letters to substantiate all of this. Once we established these relationships, we went to the companies to let them know, number one, we wanted to move towards independent pilotage. We have formed these relationships with these pilot groups that have informed us as to how it works with your company in particular in different jurisdictions. We think that this is the safest standard. We see that worldwide this is the standard being carried out. The International Maritime Pilots Association has provided us with A960, which establishes how pilotage should be done worldwide. The company's position was they want to maintain control of their pilotage, and without question, they were not interested. We then reapproached the companies, particularly the Freeport Harbor Company. Our suggestion was, we understand that you have a line item that you want to protect. Establish what salaries and benefits that you're paying the pilots today. And at that very same figure that you are currently paying, give us a net zero transfer, which means that if you spend $1 for pilots today, give us that $1 and just let us be independent. The Freeport Harbor Company said that we were attempting to take their commercial interests, and they were not interested again. They asserted themselves at that point as the harbor authority, which we know that they are in fact not. They are a private company that run the harbor, and they have no authority to determine how the harbor is run or to send out letters saying that companies cannot operate in the harbor. We had the same experience with Buckeye. Now Buckeye's return to us was that they are not interested in independent pilotage at this time. Their company structure cannot use what we're suggesting. At which point we called the Houston and New York pilots just to verify that they run the same independent pilotage system in their major operations in New York and Houston, and they verified. the way the relationship works is that the relationship exists not between the pilot and Buckeye. In fact, when we first asked about Buckeye, they were not certain exactly who Buckeye was. They had to look at their records, and they saw that on a regular basis, they had a relationship with ships that go to Buckeye's private berth. So the relationship with pilots that is common is that the pilot has a relationship financially and in terms of taking command of the ship with the vessel itself. The pilot bills the vessel directly based on the fees established in the jurisdiction, and the pilot takes the vessel to whichever company's berth. So Buckeye in the Houston harbor has no relationship with the Houston pilots. The Houston pilots deal with the vessels directly. All that we suggested is that we deal with the vessels directly. We do not determine the price. The price is determined by Freeport Harbor Company and the Freeport Harbor rules. And so we thought, fairly simple deal. The company said, absolutely not. And presumably for us, because in the case of the harbor company, we offered a net zero deal with no impact to their bottom line. In fact, they would be able to cut some costs and save some money, and ultimately they controlled the cost of pilotage, so they could even raise it at a marginal rate to cover their cost or loss. We then looked at Buckeye, and Buckeye would be able to cut pilots off of their salaries, benefit structures, and we would bill ships directly. So given that there was no sort of financial drive, we could not quite determine what the challenge was. And go ahead. And in addition to all of this, according to the Port Authorities Act of the Bahamas, in a compulsory pilotage area, a pilot that is in command of a ship is not liable for damage unless there is a case of gross negligence. Gross negligence being defined as a pilot on narcotics or some drugs, a pilot drunk and enters the ship. In some cases, a pilot with a terminal illness, as we certainly have in this port. But outside of those cases where the pilot is knowingly unfit to pilot, once a pilot is in full command of their faculties, the pilot is not liable. The reason that is because, again, the international community decided a long time ago before us, and it varies in ports. There are some ports in the United States I know where they carry some small liability, in some cases like $10,000 bonds that they have to hold. But in the Bahamas, the law is very clear. Pilots do not carry liability because if pilots had to carry liability for ships, like, for example, the Allure of the Seas that just came, a $1.3 billion vessel, the cost of pilotage would go out of control worldwide. So the ship's master always maintains control of the vessel. They are ultimately responsible, according to our law. So in the case of the Buckeye incident at the berth, where the pilot that we know has a serious illness rode 90 degrees into the jetty, and so did you understand, that is absolutely ridiculous to just drive straight into the jetty. But in that case, Buckeye is now in a battle with the ship's insurance company as to who is responsible. Buckeye claimed to be independent, but the ship's insurance company, in a simple investigation, asked for the salary slip, the insurance slip, the savings, and the pension for the pilot. All of it is from Borco as opposed to Borto, the other company that does the independent pilotage. And so you have this battle back and forth for the cost of replacing the berth. If it were a pilot from the Bahamas Maritime Pilots Association, independent of company interests, there would be no question. The ship would be responsible. It would be assumed, according to our law, that the master, if they thought that there was a dangerous situation, would have taken control back over the ship and protected their ship at all costs. So you see where these kinds of things don't make sense to the pilots. As far as we could see, a net zero transfer with Freeport Harbor Company, no costs associated, you could save money, makes sense. With Buckeye, you cut the liability exposure for a Wall Street firm, we figure, okay, that's an easy one. You cut the salaries, benefits, insurances, all of these things. The pilots build the ships directly, and the cost won't be inflated because the charges to be billed are regulated. But the company still said absolutely not.
Mr. Ferguson, you could correct me if I'm wrong. You indicated that there should be independence with the pilots.
Yes.
What happens with those companies that provide, those independent companies that also provide pilotage services? Are they now, moved to come on board with the Bahamas Maritime Pilots Association? Because if they remain independent, wouldn't that still be some kind of competing?
When you say those, what happens to, which pilots are you talking about?
No, I'm wondering, are there companies that also provide, independent companies aside from the pilots that are employed by the two companies? What happens to them?
Well,
in reference to them providing services.
You're saying in terms of them competing?
Yes, would that be?
So the laws as they
situation.
No, the laws as they currently stand in the Bahamas do allow for competitive pilotage. That is something we want to address immediately. That's number one. Number two, we have a clear dossier of who the pilots are in Freeport. And so of the 18 pilots that are functioning, 14 of them are with us and have resigned. And then you have Cliff Ritchie, who is at Statoil, with the two foreign pilots whose work permits are up in June, and Statoil has not reapplied for those pilots to return working in this jurisdiction. And furthermore, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs has made it clear that they would not renew those.
Would you answer the question in the first statement?
So you can compete. However,
but the legislation
must change to address that. Yes. Independent, non-competitive, self-funded pilotage. That is what we're advocating for. And like the example he gave in Argentina, when you have competitive pilots, so let me give you an example of what could happen here. The Bahamas Maritime Pilots Association, most of the pilots, 14 of the 18, have migrated into an association. So technically what we have now is a competitive situation. In order to compete with us, the harbor is saying that they're good. They don't need any more pilots. There are 4 licenses for pilotage in Freeport. The first one was Borco, as far as I know. Borco has the first one. There was actually a situation back in the day when Borco used to assist the harbor when it was smaller with their pilotage. The second one, as far as we know, is the Freeport Pilotage Company. Then South Riding Point, and then Freeport Harbor Company got their license. And so those are the 4 companies. Now, obviously the Port Authority is not interested in granting any more of those licenses. They hardly want to keep the one that we got now. But in this case, we have a situation that could become dangerous the day that the resignations take effect, because now you're in a completely competitive market where the companies are saying that our pilots can't do the job when in fact they can, and we don't want to hire the competition.
With all of that being said and listening to everything, what is government's position on this whole thing?
As far as we've been told, the Director of Labor is really spearheading government's position. Robert Farquharson, the Director of Labor, has met with us. Before we met with the Director of Labor, which is before the resignations, we had several meetings with the Minister of Foreign Affairs, who dealt with the situation at Statoil with foreign pilots, and then with the Ministry of Transportation, Minister Glenys Hanna Martin, who indicated to us that she wants the legislation, she wants to revamp the maritime industry as she did with the aviation industry, and she wanted to set up a pilotage committee to sort of move forward with the legislation. A bit slow, but she did indicate that she wanted it to happen. The challenge is for us that the pilots are watching, like I said, in the last 6 months, an incident per month, every other month. And so these things need to be addressed more urgently. In December, the port director presented the pilots with a change to their employment agreement that completely ignored Freeport Harbor rules and asked for all training to be subject to port director's discretion, which is absolutely ridiculous. And so the pilots refused to sign, and 2 pilots were fired. In the midst of this process of us preparing our argument to make sure that the companies know what we want to do, that accelerated our movement. That is why we are moving quicker at this point, but it's certainly not something that the companies have not been introduced to. The Department of Labor got involved at the point of resignations. Now, so that we're clear, we're not a labor union, we're a professional association, but the Department of Labor got involved and asked us one question. They said, so what is the labor issue here? And we said, well, there's no labor issue. Labor issues are for people who want their jobs. We just resigned. So that's it. But the Department of Labor has taken the position that, number one, the possible uninsurability and closure of the second largest transshipment port in the Western world is a national security threat. The suggestion of the companies that they have a full complement of pilots and they can't show that complement is a threat to national security as well and national safety. That is what we've been told word for word by the Ministry of Labor, the Director of Labor, Robert Farquharson. And so his position is that he is not prepared to wait and see what happens on the 28th. He wants there to be, the reason why he had the kind of meeting that we had with Mr. Cutmore this morning is because he wants to be guided by IMO principles, and he wants to get a white paper to cabinet to make the laws conform to what the standards are that we are so loud about at IMO. He wants that done. Now, will that be done by the 28th? We don't know. Will the government make some sort of executive order to address it until the law is put in place? We don't know. We certainly hope so, because we don't intend to go back to the companies, because it's counter-cyclical to everything that we've done so far. We do intend to offer the service so that everyone is aware. It is against the law for a pilot to withhold their service without reason or cause. We stated that in our resignation letters. Since the resignation notice, the pilots have been going to work every day. Now, in the interest of full disclosure, some pilots are on sick leave because the pressure that has been exerted upon these pilots from the companies, from family members, from friends, and from conduits of the companies in some way or another has brought some pilots to the point where they need to take a break. And as you're aware, pilotage is a very stressful job. Stress from family and boarding a ship is dangerous, and it's been our position that if you feel like you're under too much pressure, do not go on board a ship. But we are not prepared to go back into the companies. The companies are trying their endeavor best. They even expressed to the government that part of their strategy is to get the pilots back by offering whatever they need to offer. There is nothing they can offer aside from independence.
In comparison to Nassau pilots versus Freeport or Grand Bahama pilots,
Yes.
what would be the work hour differences as far as pilots bringing in vessels well, I know there's no rotational system,
Yeah.
but as far as their work ethics and bringing in, what is the comparison? How many boats would you say a Freeport pilot would bring in versus Nassau pilots?
There are approximately 6,500 pilot ship movements in the Bahamas per year. Now, it's hard to total up what happens on Coco Key or the other keys, but those are areas exempted from pilotage, which we think is a problem because obviously a cruise ship has run aground in our areas before as a result of those areas being exempted. But I don't know exactly how Nassau pilotage is set up, but of that 6,500, about 89% of that is done in Freeport. Yeah. So the Freeport Harbor Company themselves do about 3,800 moves a year. Buckeye does about 1,200 moves a year. So you could see that what Nassau has 4 pilots. In Freeport altogether with pilots in the companies and all of this stuff, we have 22. So Nassau really doesn't have a maritime industry outside of bringing the food you need to eat and the cruise ships that visit. While Freeport has a transshipment port and a fully functioning maritime industry running. Now, with the activity in Freeport, the city, it's hard to see it. But if you go out to the port, the numbers are there.
I asked that question because that was one of the arguments that was posed when this first started, that
Yes.
compared to Nassau, they brought in, I mean, I can't even remember the numbers quoted because we ended up in a big argument, versus what the pilots here in Freeport brought in. And it was like, they don't bring in any ships in Freeport compared to Nassau. Now you're telling me there's 4 pilots versus 22?
Yeah, that's nonsense.
Totally ridiculous.
I mean, in Nassau, they hardly have the traffic. I mean, they literally bring in the cargo ships, and the cargo ships that run in volume are the smaller ones, like the dismissible ships in Freeport, like the tropical ship, and a mailboat brings their own ship in. It's so small, you don't even need that. You don't need a pilot for that one. So Nassau runs essentially a need-based port. They have ships that come in to provide the needs of Nassau, which, I mean, it seemed big in the Bahamas, but 270,000 people is a small town in most places. And the car boat and cruise ships, that's the volume in Nassau. It may be just over 1,000 moves, whereas the harbor company themselves is pretty rapid. And so that you understand as well, this is just to bring it into perspective. Kendall Williamson, in the year 2009, I think he himself did about 850 ship movements himself. So the suggestion that a place that has just over 1,000 moves needs, has needs outside of, it's nonsense. They don't know what they're talking about. And for the record, a pilot should not be doing almost 1,000 moves. It's absolutely ridiculous. Sir?
Now, your explanation and your presentation quite impressive. What I don't understand is, if these professionals are good enough to work for these companies now, the 2 companies, or whoever, they satisfied with their services, working under them. Now they have a problem with them working outside of them. All of a sudden they're not good enough to pay to be. I think we're missing a component here, and the component got to be agreed. It got to be agreed, because you pay this these little baby boys, you could call them, but $6,000 something a month, and because the carpenter here is so low, what if you make my company down there? But they making $60,000 a month of that probably one guy.
That's right.
That's where this resistance I think comes in. Somebody, there's a lot of honey in that rock down there, but they need to eat. Somebody is getting money, they don't want to get it cut out.
But the challenge with that is, and this is where there may be some challenge with the I feel like Nick now, I'm trying to be diplomatic, which is not normal for me. There may be a challenge with the executive's ability to understand how to protect their interests. What we were offering them was a sweetheart deal by all measures. What I mean by that is, we know for a fact that the Freeport Harbor Company collects anywhere from $6 to $9 million a year on pilotage fees. The Allure of the Seas alone collected almost $200,000 in pilotage fees. The Allure of the Seas, in and out of the shipyard, is expensive enough, but then they charge it at a rate of 200% additional on the regular fee because it's the shipyard, and when the ship is dead in the water, an additional 200% on the pilotage fees. The Allure of the Seas, $190,000 by itself. So they collect between $6 and $9 million. According to the pilot salaries that we have totaled, they may spend $1 million on pilot salaries, benefits altogether. Maybe. Which is why we thought it made sense to say, listen, give us what you spend on salaries and we'll pay it to ourselves like usual, but we'll be independent in terms of our judgment, our professionalism, the standards, the training, and everything. So for a CEO, the options in pilotage are these. One, if these guys happen to be serious, they may go to legislation, which means that the pilotage fee is paid to the Pilotage Association. Now, it won't be $9 million. It will be reappropriated based on what the fee should be based on the proper costs. It won't be a profit business anymore. But then you lose the ability to charge that and stave the $8 million off the top. So you would think that a reasonable and sensible CEO would say, okay, let me see how I can figure out to solve this problem. The other thing the CEO should do is say, all right, can I replace these guys? No, it takes 3 years on average for somebody to be trained at a reasonable level, 5 years probably. And I have a guy in my fleet now that's been there for a year, had the good credentials to get into the business, and he can only pilot 200 feet. So I can't replace him. Are there any other pilots available for me to bring in and replace them with that are trained? Well, there's a difference in the pilotage here that you should know. The Borco pilots are tanker pilots. That is an entirely different idea from being a container pilot. Now, in most ports that I'm aware of, Nick can correct me, the pilots are trained on all types of ships, which means that in Houston, a pilot may get called for a tanker ship in one section of the rotation, the next ship is a container ship, the next ship is a bulk carrier, the next ship is... They are trained for all types of ships. But in the Bahamas, there's a unique situation where the Borco pilots are only tanker pilots. They wouldn't dare jump on, say, the allure of the seas and just go pilot it into the harbor. They're not used to that type of ship or that type of cargo. So you would think, okay, the CEO then says, all right, so I can't replace them. There's no other intelligence in the area for me to just bring in, which is probably around the time when he decided to hire the dialysis pilot who crashed into the jetty, which was not such a good idea. So you say, okay, how can I cut the best deal? Well, we thought through all of that for him and said the best deal would be don't cost him any money. We offered that deal, he said no. And so now we are to the point where it goes to legislation and they may lose everything. Now, I don't know what they intend to do with that, but I don't run the Freeport Harbor Company. I'm just the licensee that's competing with them at the moment.
One question, what compels the ships and vendors to go to a particular piloting association? Is there some mechanism that says that as under law of the seas, I can choose this organization?
Well, in a competitive district, they can choose. But in a non-competitive district, there's one pilot association, and that's who you go to. But in a competitive district, they can choose. And so, for example, less than 24 hours after we resigned, one of the captains from Carnival called us and said, so who's supposed to pilot my ship? I don't, I into no mix-up. I want the pilots that I'm accustomed to piloting the ship, because there's a lot at stake. And so our response was, well, we're available. Now, for us, that's not the ideal response because we don't support competitive pilotage. The response that we want is that we have now revamped the laws of the Bahamas towards safe, independent, self-funded, non-competitive pilotage, and we are now offering the service as an association.
Question, what can we as business persons, individuals as well as citizens, do for the advocacy of this? Because I see it directly interrelated with the growth of the economy as well as our personal businesses. What can we do to assist you in getting this?
Well, I think, so one of the things that we've done is we've contacted the insurance companies, because obviously the insurance companies want to know what's going on. business persons can start to be vocal about their support. They can call the Port Authority, they can call the Freeport Harbor Company, and or write letters in the newspaper and wherever else saying, listen, we went to the presentation, this only makes sense. We looked at the international standards, we made basic comparisons, this only makes sense. It's what's being done around the world in most ports, it's what is considered safe, and it's what we should embrace. So business persons can be more vocal. What we've seen business people doing now is sort of just informing us as to what is being said around town. One of the things I tell the pilots at the end of every meeting we have is, at the end of the day, the ships have to move.
That's right.
And so don't forget that. Don't let nobody tell you they hire one skiff captain from the Defense Force and he coming to go pilot ships. They will mash up these ships, and the P&I clubs are already notified about our position, and they won't get coverage. And so that kind of stuff will severely impact their business, which severely impacts Freeport. So business persons, business leaders, need to start telling the port to get their acting on.
So at the end of the month, if tanker for Walco decides to contact the Bahamas Maritime Pilots Association directly
Yes.
to move that ship, they can do that.
They can do that. Now, here's what will happen. So Godfrey Smith is already confused about what his powers are. So what he will do is say things like, oh, this can, and in fact, I'll go further. We think that the only reason that Walco has not come to a sensible position on this is because they are being either threatened or suggested that it cannot happen by the Port Authority. And I say the Port Authority because Ian Road himself has talked to pilots and asked them to take their jobs back. And so I can comfortably say the Port Authority. And just so you know, the absolute defense to defamation is truth. So I have one little piece of legal training and I'm comfortable calling names. The Port Authority and the Harbor Company has made their position clear, either by letter, whether they have the right or not, to sort of threaten operators, launch operators, agents, and other companies that if they do business with them, with us, they will be in jeopardy. Now, how they can execute this jeopardy is only up to their creativity. But the challenge is that at the end of the day, ships got to move. Insurance companies have standards. We've already made them aware of what is going on. And so if there is a suggestion, and we're going so far as to, when this date comes up, we're going to ask the P&I clubs to issue an alert to ships that the pilots them gone. You know, they're not there. There are not enough pilots to pilot the ships. Now, will they issue the alert or not? We don't know. But I can tell you one thing. If a ship comes into this jurisdiction with a P&I club aware of the fact that there were 18 pilots and now there are 4, and there is an incident, and when they do the investigation, as Nick talked about, the pilot was doing an unusual number of hours in order to try to do the work, I promise you there will be some coverage issues. And like Nick said, the costs of these incidents aren't small. It's only so much $50 million bills that any of these companies can handle not being covered by their insurance before they close down. So that battle that will happen between the agents and the harbor will have to bear itself out. Now, any responsible country won't allow for it. The Ministry of Labor has indicated to us that they're not interested in that day coming because it's just not safe. It's not sensible. And Walco already has 2 pilots that have been on 24-hour call for 14 days.
What?
As of today. So, because they're afraid that we may or may not come to work on any given day. That has not happened. We have gone to work as stated, but they have had 2 pilots on call for 14 days, out of order by any standard. So the companies have already shown their hand. They are prepared to do whatever. Will Freeport allow them to do whatever? Will the Bahamas government allow them to do whatever? We already know the Port Authority is interested in them doing whatever. Those are the questions. But what we can tell you is that the pilots have made their position clear. We are interested in international standards. That's where we are prepared to be. That's what we're prepared to do. Anything short of that, and we're not interested. Sir?
How much pressure are they getting from the ship owners?
I'm sure it's an unreasonable amount. Because we, shortly after contacting ship owners, P&I clubs, we started to get offers of double salaries and all sorts of nonsense. And then, of course, the president of the Port Authority started sitting down with people personally. So, for the principals of the Port Authority outside of the Harbor Company and Borco to be getting actively involved, we're certain that they're aware that they'll be fairly uninsurable by the 28th. The fact that this deal has not settled itself yet is ridiculous. I mean, the fact that Ian Rowe finds himself on the side of nonsense and poor standards and jeopardizing Freeport says enough to me. I don't know why he would take that position, because he regularly swears that he's interested in protecting the city. But given the economic situation of the city, we are obviously all aware that that is not so.
Do you think it's possible that they could be utilizing a strategy whereby somewhere down the road, when the pressure really comes on, to approach the ship owners to try to get more money out of them because they have some kind of catastrophe going on in Grand Mama, where they can be more lucrative for them?
I don't know that that could make it more lucrative for you, for your area to become more dangerous, and then you charge more money.
So that's also possible.
Well, there is no, so that we understand why I say at the end of the day, ships got to move. There's no solution to there's no, I mean, you can't just solve the problem. Like I said, there's a young man that is very competent, sensible, well-trained. His prerequisites were good. He entered the training program, and after 1 year, he is only up to 200 feet of clearance. So outside of this intellectual property, they don't have much options. There's no solution. You just can't solve it. You need the requisite intellectual property. And that is the most important part about this for us, is that these are not just man gods of piloting, but their intellectual property in each of their minds, their training individually, is what the leverage is here. That's what we've put up on the chopping block and said, let's use this to help get our industry better. And we'll see how it works. But we think a responsible government would act. And I'm led to believe that the government is going to do something, because it's going to be hard on explanation day, after having received all of the necessary notices and suggestions and the visits and all of these sorts of things. It is going to be very difficult for the government to put their head in the sand. And we've made it so. Any other questions? I think if Godfrey Smith were here tonight, he'd work with us. But he's obviously, again, uninterested.
Could you just explain to the group that, I guess, if Walker was to have another incident, let's say tomorrow, while under the same standards, what is the chances of Buckeye surviving?
Yeah, I mean, so right now there's the incident that was at the jetty with the pilot that was sick. And I'll say this publicly, but I mean, it's whatever. It's not my liability. So yeah. But you know, the pilot had dialysis before the incident at the jetty. Somehow the quote-unquote investigation has not borne that out yet. And the basic symptoms of dialysis, one of which is glaring for a pilot, is depth perception issues. So, I mean, you can't see far. I don't know what you're doing on the ship. But the issue is that Buckeye as a company is being irresponsible with having pilots on staff because it makes them open to the liability of any incidents. So a ship going to the jetty right now with one of the pilots who are there, who have been on call for 24 hours for 14 days, number one, not only have they worked too much hours, but if there's an accident, Buckeye is up for questioning of being responsible for half of the damage. So one or two of those incidents and $50 to $100 million in damage, and Buckeye becomes, insolvent as a company. So for the protection of our own economy, we should not allow them to have that much liability on the table. But for some reason, they want the liability. Very odd for a Wall Street traded firm, in my opinion. Any other questions?
You talked about the insurance that they said that we needed.
Oh yeah, it's been suggested that we need insurance to operate. As I stated before, the Port Authorities Act is very clear. A pilot does not hold liability when piloting a ship unless it's a case of gross negligence. In the case of gross negligence, the liability is not only civil, but it's also criminal. So, the pilot could definitely go to jail. So that there is no need in this jurisdiction, based on our laws, for pilots to carry liability insurance. It may be aside from the usual $2 million to operate a business of any sort. But other than that, it's not necessary. Any other questions? Sean, any questions from an up-and-coming mariner? Please throw your hands together for Captain Sean Malcolm. And the reason why I raised Sean is because, not to embarrass you, but this young man wants to be a pilot. He's currently in school and he wants to be a mariner. He wants to go to school, get the training, and enter this field. And it makes absolutely no sense for us to suggest to him that there is a future here if, one, in this situation, we don't sort out the challenges with the industry and allow for the pilots to carry a better standard, but also if we don't suggest to him before he goes to school that things should be done properly, that his future is secure if he meets the credentials to pilot in a way that is safe and following international standards. Because the beauty of him going to school is that he will go to SUNY Maritime or some other school and see the standards and then ask us why we don't follow these back home. He'll visit the New York and New Jersey pilots and see how they operate their organization and then question us back here. And in most cases, as with pilots that we've seen, that not pilots, but mariners that have been born and raised in the Bahamas and trained elsewhere, they do not come back because they find it to be just ridiculous the way that we operate. So at this point, we got to fix it. And we got to fix it not only for the industry right now, but also for the Sean Malcolms who want to get into the industry, and it should be operating in a way that makes sense, that is up to standard, and that is sustainable. Any other questions? Okay. I mean, we've been here a while, but listen, this isn't a light issue. By any measure, it's not a light issue. Okay, well, thank you very much for coming. We had a wonderful time, I think so. Please extend your support and your anything that you have for these pilots who are in some of the hottest 18 days of their life. All of the efforts of corporate Freeport are trying to make these pilots give in to poor standards. And at this point, they have given up all possible severance in the companies, which was a sizable amount of money for some pilots in the case of some of them that have been working at the companies for 20 years or more. They've given all of that up to move towards this, and they need the support of the Freeport community. Thank you very much.